Now, you were all very young when you joined these groups. If we could actually just quickly even just go down the line here. How old were you, Paul, when you joined?
14.
Usama?
13.
TJ?
14.
I've just said that.
15. So each of you joined at such an incredibly young age. What was it about these groups? What did they offer? What was missing? What was so alluring about what they were bringing to the table that at that age you saw this as your best option?
You know, it's kind of ironic for me. Growing up, I did not want to be a gang member. I can remember crying on my stairs in the hallway when my father was in jail, and just detesting his lifestyle and not liking his friends and the things that they did. But there came a point in time where I felt like I had no other options, and I was actually jumped into my gang, not by choice. There was a lot of abuse, like TJ mentioned, in my household, so I went to the streets for comfort, for support, for camaraderie, and the gang provided that. And I was just looking for somebody to embrace me and allow me to have an identity and a voice. And I just wanted to hang out. And one day they just kind of looked at me and said, you know, we've been asking you to join the gang for several weeks now, and we're tired of asking you. And so you know, they proceeded to beat me. And after that, they gave me a hug, shook my hand, and said, no, you're from the gang. And I specifically remember waking up the next day and just looking out my window and thinking, what the heck did I just get myself into? I started thinking people that I can't associate with anymore, places that I couldn't go to anymore, enemies that I had to assume. It was very difficult, but I felt I had no other option growing up in a gang family, so I embraced it and I thrived in it. And within a matter of 3 or 4 years, I became somewhat of an authority amongst my peers and started heavily recruiting and organizing some of the operations within the gang.
I grew up in a very devout Muslim family, but also growing up in North London in the 80s, I experienced a lot of racism at school, and always felt I was not welcome and excluded from white society. The 80s was a very politicized time for Muslim internationally. You had the Afghan war going on, you'd had the Iranian Revolution, you had the whole Israeli-Palestinian situation as it is now, very live, the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, etc. This group gave me a strong sense of identity. To belong to a particular group, I was a Salafi group, and we all dressed in a certain way, wearing robes and turbans. For most of my time at Cambridge, I used to cycle around to my lectures around the university, wearing a robe and a turban. I learned martial arts through this group, including how to handle knives, etc. And of course, taking part in a war at the age of 19 was incredibly cool. There was a sense of power, of belonging, and of adventure.
For me, it's very similar to Paul. In Saddam, it was a sense of identity. It gave me a purpose in life. It gave me an outlook. It gave me something to look forward to every day. My friends, hanging out, what we planned to accomplish, meeting those goals. And then we were like, okay, now what's next? You know, like everybody has goals in life, but our goals were just different. And they gave me that my entire cause, my entire identity, my entire being became that. Because you couldn't do anything else. I mean, there was, as you said, Paul, I couldn't go to certain neighborhoods anymore. I couldn't go to everything was defined. Instantly, as soon as I got involved, everything became defined. And it's structured. I guess something I lacked and didn't have was that structure and that control.
I guess what's interesting is that there was a relationship between TJ and his background and mine, and Osama with what he's mentioned with racism. So being chased and hounded by these Combat 18 group of racist thugs helped me question my own identity and the questions I needed to resolve, and I joined a group. And for TJ, it was the exact opposite side of the equation. And I think that it's really interesting to explore that there still is, in propaganda terms, there still is a relationship between those who use Islam to radicalize young people and get them to join organizations by playing identity politics, and those who use far-right ideologies and play similar identity politics to get young white kids into organizations like the one that TJ joined. And I think it's really interesting to explore that, because actually what most people don't know is they have formal relationships. These groups, they speak to each other because they recognize that they have this mutually reinforcing agenda. And so why not, on the other side, exactly what we're doing now due to, thanks Jared for organizing this, why not on the other side also have that relationship and speak and decide how we can work together to challenge that?
Now, TJ, Usama, you both talked about that aha moment for you. TJ, you talked about your son using a racial slur and you realizing you didn't want your son to grow up following the same path that you did. Usama, you talked about 7/7. Paul, Majid, for you guys, what was that aha moment where you realized you had to get out?
Like I mentioned earlier, I never really wanted to join in the first place. So I constantly would remind myself every few weeks, every few months, gosh, how long is this going to last? How am I going to get out of this mess? I know this isn't something I want to die doing. But it probably hit me hardest when I had a young friend of mine who really wanted to be like me. He followed me around. He wanted to adopt the same nickname that I had. In the gang culture, you have to earn it. You ask an older guy who maybe you aspire to be, and you have to earn his name. So he was doing that for several months, and I knew that my mind really started to shift, and I knew that it was not going to end up well for this kid. But subconsciously, I guess I would tell myself that he had time. He was young. Let him learn for a couple of years, and then I'll sit him down later on in life and kind of help him leave the gang. And I never got that chance. He was murdered at 14 years old, and for a long period of time, I felt like I had blood on my hands, like I let it happen, and I didn't do anything about it. So that was probably the biggest tipping point for me. And then I was going to have my first child, and all of those two events happened within a few months of each other. So I was either going to really fall off the deep end or, make a positive exit.
So I think what was significant was that two things happened. In prison, when we were convicted, we were adopted by Amnesty International as prisoners of conscience because our group wasn't the type of group that attacks civilians in terrorist operations. It was more like a revolutionary organization. So Amnesty adopted us as prisoners of conscience, and that was the first stage of my intellectual journey, because up until that point, all I'd ever known was that I defined human rights organizations as the soft power tool of colonialism to colonize the minds of my people. And it was the first time I'd actually been adopted and campaigned for in a more effective way than even my own group had campaigned for our release by someone that I'd defined as my enemy. And then the second factor was the years of speaking and studying with the former jihadists, the political prisoners, anyone who knows Egypt. Ayman Noor, for example, is the head of the Liberal Tomorrow Party. He was in prison with me. We had the current head of the Global Muslim Brotherhood. He was in prison with me. We had former jihadists like the assassins of the former president that I mentioned, Anwar Sadat. They were in prison. And these discussions that we had were fascinating, and especially because those who had been former jihadists had abandoned their own ideology. And so through discussing and studying with these people, what I realized, and this is the crucial point, as Osama said, was that actually what we had done was we'd politicized our religion, and we turned it into a political ideology. And it was actually a human project. And we were actually, what we were trying to do was take power, and it was a cynical use of the faith for modern ideological purposes. And when I realized that through continuous study and through looking at the original sources of the faith, I thought I could no longer carry on with this very sort of cynical manipulation of the faith.
Now, we all, a lot of people here are interested in technology. A lot of people here work in technology. There's a saying that I like to mutter, which is technology complicates every challenge, but it can also be part of the solution to every challenge. How do you all see, given the work that you're doing today, the role of technology morphing or complicating the challenge of recruitment of young people into these organizations?
Gosh, it's very difficult. For example, a lot of the kids that I work with at the middle school through Southern California Crossroads have MySpace accounts, Facebook accounts, and like you said, it's a huge recruitment tool. A lot of cyberbullying, so a lot of altercations that take place online, a lot of times manifest into the community on the streets. And so we're starting to realize now, at least in my industry, that we need to get online as well and do some mediation online. But unfortunately, in inner cities, in any community where there's a lot of poverty and abuse and violence, that type of behavior is glorified, whether it's by watching Scarface or any of these mafia-type movies, kids latch onto that, and they're the so-called heroes of the community, and so we're kind of working against that.
TJ, I know you have a particular perspective on this.
Well, everything about the media, the right-wing extremists initially is, if you guys come out with it, they're on it. The next day, they're using it, whether it's the computer, the internet, all new connections they make are all through tweets. So everything they do is technological. So I have to ride that same wave constantly. So when something new comes out, I got to learn about it, I got to use it, I got to innovate it in any way, shape, or form. Give you an example. 2 young kids in California, never met a white supremacist face to face, studied it all online, burned 2 synagogues, planned to bomb a church, and killed a gay and lesbian couple. To reverse that, I never met this kid publicly face to face. He had a hate site about me asking for me to die. He actually had a picture of my head exploding, being shot. Worked with him for about 8 months, going back and forth, back and forth. He dropped the website, and within a year, I had him out of the gang. So technology can work both ways. It can work to our advantage, it can work to our disadvantage. It just depends on how we want to use it.
No, while we're on that theme, Majid, before I go to you, because I know you have a couple thoughts on how mobile has been used for recruitment, but TJ, I always find it very interesting for you to share the number of people that you've gotten out of the organization and how many more you have to get out before you actually exceed the number that you got in.
I've gotten 87 kids out of the white supremacy movement. I'm 4 away from hitting my goal. They're getting the same amount of kids out as I got in.
And Majid, what about you?
One of the greatest misconceptions is that Islamist extremists are, I suppose, technologically inept or uneducated. And actually, it couldn't be more wrong. It's the opposite. Statistically, on average, they're better educated than the average American. As Mark Sageman's book, Leaderless Jihad, demonstrates. We can demonstrate that anecdotally. So bin Laden's an engineer. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's an engineer, the man accused of masterminding 9/11. The man accused of killing Daniel Pearl in Karachi went to where I did my master's, the London School of Economics. His name's Omar Sheikh. And that translates into technology. So I learned how to use email through my group back in the days when nobody knew what email was. We were trained in using the internet and technology to our advantage. I mean, why do you think bin Laden was sitting in Abbottabad for so long and communicating? He was actually communicating with his group. And one of the best intelligence agencies in the world, the CIA, couldn't detect that. They couldn't detect his means of communication. And right now, they're looking at how he managed to communicate with his organization sitting in Pakistan under the noses of the ISI. So I'll give you an anecdote to this story, because actually it's a real problem. I work in Pakistan. As well as founding Quilliam, we founded an organization called Khudi, which is a youth-led social movement in Pakistan to work on the grassroots to inoculate young Pakistanis against the extremist narrative and advocate for a democratic culture. When the governor of Punjab was assassinated, we saw in Pakistan the opposite of what happened in Egypt with the Arab Spring and the uprising in Egypt. Facebook was used almost instantly by people setting up fan pages for the assassin of the governor of Punjab. He was assassinated because he was challenging extremism. And likewise, when bin Laden was arrested, there was a plethora of Facebook groups set up to say he's a martyr, when he was killed, that he's a martyr. And both these sites attracted thousands and thousands of followers. In the assassin of the governor of Punjab's case, the site had to be taken down by Facebook. But until it was taken down, they had hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of followers. And the anecdote is this, that these organizations are very tech savvy. My group that I helped co-found in Pakistan, my former group, one of the things they did is they set up a stall outside Mobilink offices. Should I mention the name? Oh, I just did. Sorry, Mobilink. But they set up a stall outside the offices of Mobilink to recruit staff from Mobilink. And the reason they did that, and they succeeded, by the way, in recruiting staff from the mobile phone company. And so people joined the group, and they were working in the mobile phone offices. And this is one of the largest mobile phone providers in Pakistan. And the group was then able to take phone numbers of key intellectuals, media personalities, and politicians from across the country, and then group text message them with their press releases and propaganda messages, because they had people on the inside of the mobile phone companies providing them that information. And that was a deliberate strategy by them to recruit for that purpose. And when I toured Pakistan, I've taught about 22 universities with this message. Everyone I met from the media side or the politician side, they all asked me, how the hell did these people get my phone number? because they send me these texts almost weekly. And that's how they got their phone number, and that's how, they're very effective at communicating. And I don't think we are successfully leveraging in the opposite direction to challenge these messages.
Usama?
I just wanted to add the human element to this. Technology can make recruitment or counter-recruitment much more efficient, and we know that. But essentially, my experience is that the human element is crucial. So I was involved with a group which had a very charismatic human leader, and all the groups I've known have had that also. It's almost a cult-like mentality. There's a strong element of cultism in these groups. And in fact, some of the best counter-narratives which need to be produced also need to be circulated via charismatic figures who have done so across the Muslim world. The only danger is they become targets of assassins, etc. But connecting people with other human beings, so Muslims and Jews, for example, or white and black people, Asians with other ethnic minorities, especially when they demonize the other, that's a large part of breaking down this problem, just increasing that human contact to break down the barriers. And of course, technology can help with that as well.
Now, when I first approached all of you, it must have been about 6 months ago. And I initially proposed the idea of let's have a more holistic conversation about radicalization across all these different contexts. What was your initial reaction to that? And now that you've actually had the chance to interact with each other over the course of 6 months, what have you learned from each other's different experiences? What is similar? What's different? What's your kind of initial takeaway as we begin to expand the conversation?
For me, the first thing I thought of was I don't want to be labeled as an extremist or sit at a table with somebody who I thought promoted violence on a much larger scale. To me, growing up in a gang lifestyle, you kind of justify it by telling yourself, it's just bad guys killing bad guys, as opposed to the innocent being the victim. So I was a little bit cautious, but over the last few months, I think our group has grown pretty strong, and there's a lot of similarities, a lot of differences, and I think we all appreciate and respect the different contexts in which we come from. And I think we got a pretty powerful group here that's ready to do some work all over the world, actually.
I'd always known that there were similarities. So, for example, after 9/11, I heard a couple of young black kids in our neighborhood actually saying, "Cool, the terrorists pulled it off. They rocked it, man." And they're walking down my street saying that very loudly. In my Hard Talk interview a few years ago, when I was grilled on this, I said, look, what we did was very similar to gang members stabbing each other on the streets of London. So I knew those connections were there, but had never really met people involved with these gangs. And one thing which TJ said, which really struck me, was, if you don't mind me mentioning, he said when he was 18, he wanted to get hold of a homemade nuclear bomb and take out Philadelphia or something, he said. And I remember thinking, oh my God, that's the kind of ideas we had of becoming a suicide bomber and taking out Tel Aviv or whatever. And so again, there's that common humanity here, the good side and the not so good side.
It's okay, it was Washington, D.C.
Washington.
I kind of like Philadelphia.
Sorry.
No. I've learned from this that the white supremacy movement is very much in the middle. I've learned that we have, because of a lot of our hardcore gang activity, we have connections with not only Paul, but another gentleman on the panel, Melvin, but also the extremist element, because we wanted this. They wanted an Islamic caliphate. I wanted an Aryan caliphate. Just learning all these different things, and as we grow, we just keep expanding. And I said this to Jared when he first asked me to come onto the committee. I said, unbelievably, thank God, and it's about time. I remember sitting down with violent, like I said, violent Muslim extremists and others to figure out how we can divide this country, how we can work together to beat our one common enemy. And then, the enemy of my enemy is my friend until that enemy's no longer there. But at the same time, we're both working to destroy that enemy. And then we can work about each other. And this is the first time now on the opposite side that we're working together to counteract this and combat this.
Can I just say, most of it's come out, so I just want to say that actually the first time we went upon this path to explore the way that extremism manifests across different cultural contexts, and the first time that we had done something publicly was at Google Zeitgeist around 10 months ago. So congratulations to Google Zeitgeist, because I think it started off something which is going to have global implications. And one of the ways which is, it's really interesting for me as well, because of the work I do, that when we're speaking to young Pakistanis, the response we get is we're often accused of, like, why are you only focusing on Muslims when extremism isn't exclusively a Muslim problem? Now, of course, that's my remit, that's my focus, that's the work I'm doing and Osama's doing, but this helps us to demonstrate that extremism can manifest in different ways across different cultural contexts, so that nobody feels exclusively picked on, but rather they recognize that we're all working together to find common solutions to what are, in effect, common problems.
It's interesting. One of the reactions that I get from people when I talk about bringing former extremists together from different contexts, their initial reaction is almost across the board, how do you know that they're really former? And I always say, they've left the organizations and now they've renounced violence and now they're actively and publicly speaking against the organizations that they used to be part of. But hidden in that sort of joke or serious reaction in a lot of cases is a huge challenge that you all have, which is that it is really difficult to be a former. And it's hard to imagine more credible voices out there than people who used to be part of it, saw it, didn't like it, left, and are now risking their lives to work against it. How do you deal with that? How do you overcome the stereotypes and perceptions and challenges that come with the label of being a former, or the skepticism that come with being a former?
The work that I do is unique. As a gang interventionist from Los Angeles, I work at St. Francis Medical Center in the trauma department as the injury prevention coordinator. So I'm usually the first face that a patient who has just suffered a gunshot wound or a stab wound as a result of gang violence, I'm usually the first person that they see. So I actually have to have somewhat of a relationship with active gang members. And you have to walk a fine line between law enforcement and the gang members. If I get too close to either side, I'm seen as the enemy and can suffer the consequences. So I have to be very transparent. I can't demonize gangs because, like I said, for some of these kids, it's what they're born into. It's their family. So it's not as simple as just like what I was always told growing up is, gangs are stupid, gangs are no good. Why would you join a gang? But that was my family. How can you tell me that my family wasn't what I was supposed to be a part of? But it is very difficult maintaining that license to operate. And like I said, being transparent is probably the most critical key piece. And we guys are constantly always checking to make sure that I'm in it for the right reasons and not trying to exploit anybody or even disrespect any organization publicly.
My work and background has been largely with the Muslim faith community, and in fact, it's my faith which informs all that I do. What I try to do is be honest and tell people about my journey. So I get accused of being a sellout and of being bought by the government, etc. And I tell them, no, I've actually had an intellectual journey. I mean, I may have been an extremist before, but I was always a well-intentioned extremist who was looking for the truth. And people have journeys. In the Quran we have the story of Moses who kills somebody when he's younger by mistake, and when the Pharaoh taunts him about his previous murder, he held his hand up and said, I did that and I was wrong and I was misguided at the time. So what I try to do is explain to people that we all subscribe to these ideas, Islamism, jihadism, etc. But analyze them coldly. They're wrong. I'm still against illegal wars. I was in Afghanistan again in Helmand with the government last summer, trying to help negotiate with former Taliban, etc., to bring an end to the war. And that's the only way I know is to stick to the truth and try to express that truth and put up with the trouble you get from both sides. Because some people call you a sellout, others say you're not a real former, you're a wolf in sheep's clothing, etc., etc. I mean, we have to deal with all that, but just give your message the best you can and hope that it has the right results.
Time is running out, unfortunately, and I wanted to get to one more point to wrap it up, which is you may be wondering why we're doing this, right? Why is Google putting together a panel of this nature? Well, our mission statement is organize the world's information, make it available, make it useful, and make the world a better place in the process. That's what we believe we're doing here. We're organizing different perspectives that may not otherwise be mixed and matched to help us better understand the nature of a particular challenge, think about it differently, and try to determine what we can actually do to find a solution. And what began as an experiment in Zeitgeist about 10 months ago in Arizona as a small conversation between Majid and Paul has since grown into several conversations that we've done, not just with the 4 people you see up here, but with a handful of others. And it's going to culminate, at least in the next stage, in a summit that we're putting on in Dublin, June 26th to 28th, the Summit Against Violent Extremism, where Google has teamed up with the Council on Foreign Relations to bring together 88 former gang members, former religious extremists, former right-wing extremists, and former nationalist extremists, together with 20 survivors of terrorism and violence, together with NGOs and academics and private sector entities, all to sort of form this intellectual collision around one of the biggest challenges facing us today. And I wanted to sort of close by asking the 4 panelists who are here with us today, who have been part of this journey from the beginning, what do you hope will come out of that? We're making an investment to bring together and facilitate a conversation that has never happened with such a large group of formers from so many different countries who speak so many different languages and who have been affiliated with so many different groups. Help us understand why something like this is important.
Should I go first? I hope more people with resources and influence come to the table. I love hearing Jeffrey speak. I always get re-energized, and I'm fighting the same battle. And like he mentioned, it's very difficult to raise funds for organizations that focus on troubled kids, or whatever society calls minority kids, or kids that come from a gang family, or a family that's been involved in organized crime or what have you. It's difficult, and a lot of times it feels like it's a losing battle. But you have to do what you can, and I think it has to be a collaborative effort. Like what you see here, people who might, without your help, might not have ever communicated or came together for a common cause, now are working together to make a difference. So that's what I hope happens.
So I just want to say that on a global scale, these organizations, extremist organizations, are already cooperating. I alluded to this earlier. And it's not just Islamists cooperating on a global scale. Islamists are cooperating with each other in their separate groups, but also with other types of gang-based or far-right fascist-based organizations. And they are exploiting globalization to their advantage. So what I hope that we can achieve is to replicate that for democratic activism, for citizenship-based politics, and to challenge the extremist ideology across all these different cultural contexts in a way that truly exploits globalization, so that we can develop an international network and start pushing back against violent extremism and non-violent extremism in all its manifestations.
And for me, I just want as people out there, as we grow, and as this continues to go on, I want these kids to realize that they're not alone. There's going to become a network of all of us out there, and hopefully this network will continue to grow. And that, someday, as we've all said, someday we'll make the term former very popular.
Yeah, similarly, I hope it will bolster the counter-narrative. It's kind of cool to be radical for young people. It's very easy to give radical Friday sermons like we gave for many years, talking about jihad against the US and Israel and this kind of thing. And also, stories of heroes, the heroes of the Afghan jihad, for example, were fresh in our memory. But some of the people I met here, heroes who've survived terrorism, heroes who fight against violence or poverty or racism in their communities, I think it's a chance to celebrate that kind of heroism and attract people to that kind of radical behavior, which is also far more cool, actually.
Please join me in a round of applause for our panel.